Mara Vance stepped beneath the turning rotor as mountain wind drove dust across Raven's Spur's upper pad and snapped the yellow litter sheet against the wounded SEAL's chest. The Black Hawk waited 10 yards away with its cabin doors open, dark fuselage trembling under rising power, while gray clouds spilled over the western ridge faster than forecast. Mara caught the litter rail before it struck a corpsman's knee and helped guide the casualty toward the aircraft. "Watch the oxygen bottle," she called. "Straps riding high." The younger corpsman shifted his grip. Mara tightened the cylinder, checked the regulator, then pressed 2 fingers beneath the patient's collar. His pulse was fast but steady. "Eli Navarro, stay with me." His eyes opened. "Trying. Keep trying." The exercise had become real 23 minutes earlier when a training platform collapsed and drove broken railing into Navarro's side. The field team had controlled the bleeding, but definitive care lay beyond 2 mountain corridors and a weather front arriving early. Mara clipped the casualty card into the worn green kneeboard sleeve against her thigh, wrote his oxygen reading, and tapped the litter frame twice. Once for the patient, once for the route home. Chief Warrant Officer Jonah Reed leaned from the left cockpit seat. Weight and condition, 186 with gear. Pressure holding. Saturation 92 on oxygen. He can tolerate this altitude now, not indefinitely. Reed relayed the figures. Near the nose, Major Corbin Sayer pressed one hand to his headset and motioned impatiently toward the runway. Colonel Adrian Hale waited beside 4 SEALs, watching the cloud line consume another strip of sky. "How long?" Hale asked. "Until he needs surgery?" Mara said. "Less than the planned route gives us if we climb into thicker weather." Hale's jaw tightened. That wasn't the question. It's the answer that matters. The SEALs knew Mara as the medic who kept people breathing in the cabin, not as someone entitled to speak about aircraft decisions. Sayer ended his radio call. Maintenance cleared the earlier indication. "We launch now or lose the west corridor." The co-pilot moved the controls through the ground check while Reed watched the panel. From outside, the motion appeared routine. Through the deck beneath her boots, Mara felt something else. A helicopter often spoke through vibration before it spoke through alarms. The control moved. The aircraft answered. On the next input, the linked response hesitated for less than a second. Reed's left shoulder stiffened. "Again," he said. The co-pilot repeated the movement. This time it appeared normal. A maintenance sergeant lifted both hands. "Can't reproduce it." Sayer pointed toward the ridge. "Then stop testing and launch." The team pushed Navarro's litter into the cabin. Mara secured the mounts, checked his airway, and fastened her medical harness. A single flight medic patch sat above her left pocket. Black trauma shears rested beside it. Navarro watched her track the cockpit. "Something wrong. Something is always wrong on a helicopter in mountain weather. My job is knowing what matters first." He managed a weak breath of laughter. Hale climbed aboard behind the cockpit. The SEALs secured themselves along the cabin wall. Sayer remained on the pad, driving the departure from the ground. Mara's pilot currency had expired 3 years earlier. She was not current on this Black Hawk variant, and no remembered control pressure gave her authority beyond the medical cabin. Still, she moved to the cockpit opening. "Chief," she called. Reed turned halfway. The resistance was strongest through the right seat controls. The aircraft answered after the input. The co-pilot looked back. "You felt that from the cabin?" "I felt it through the deck." Hale looked at Reed. "Control problem?" Reed paused. "Intermittent resistance." It cleared. "Maintenance says no fault," Hale said. Mara kept her voice level. "Noto produced fault." That isn't the same thing. Outside, the cloud line swallowed the ridge. Sayer slapped the fuselage and gave the launch signal. Reed looked once at the weather, then at Navarro. "We're going." Mara returned to the litter because that was where she had been assigned. The cabin door closed. As the Black Hawk began to roll, the link controls caught again, small, brief, unmistakable. Mara looked forward. Reed's jaw tightened. He had felt it too, but the helicopter continued toward the runway. The Black Hawk paused at the runway threshold while the western ridge vanished behind advancing gray cloud. Mara kept one hand on Eli Navarro's litter mount and watched Jonah Reed test the linked controls again. The response appeared normal, but his hesitation before the next movement showed he no longer dismissed the earlier catch. The co-pilot pressed a metal checklist case back into a loose overhead clip and returned his hand to the controls. Fatigue showed beneath his eyes. "Hold position," Colonel Adrian Hale ordered. Major Corbin Sayer's voice came through the radio. "Raven 2, weather window is closing. Status: rechecking an intermittent control concern," Reed said. "Maintenance cleared it." "I know what maintenance cleared." Hale turned toward Mara. "What are you asking for?" She stepped toward the cockpit boundary without crossing it. "Let me use the observer position behind the right seat. I can monitor the response while Reed flies and remain clear of the controls." "You current on this platform?" "No, sir." "How long out?" 3 years. A young SEAL near the rear door muttered. "Simulator hours make everybody brave." A brief nervous laugh followed before the senior corpsman silenced it with a look. Mara ignored them. If the resistance returns inside the corridor, Reed should not have to decide whether he is feeling weather, fatigue, or the aircraft while already committed. Hale looked at Reed. Assessment. Intermittent. Not enough to declare a failure. Enough that another qualified observer would help. Qualified. Hale repeated. Reed kept his eyes forward. Current would help more. Hale had once signed the report after unauthorized cockpit interference turned a recoverable ground emergency into a larger one. His caution came from consequence, not contempt. Mara understood that, but she also knew the wrong lesson could become dangerous. She had once been qualified on a related military utility helicopter platform and still completed approved simulator sessions for cockpit-to-cabin coordination. None of it made her current on this Black Hawk variant or gave her authority to occupy a flight station. "Your patient is behind you," Hale said. "His condition depends on what happens ahead of me. Your assignment is to keep him alive through the flight. That is why I am warning you." Navarro's monitor sounded as his saturation dropped another point. Mara adjusted his oxygen. The co-pilot looked toward the patient, then rolled one shoulder as if trying to work out fatigue. Reed noticed. "Hale notiget, red notigen." No one named it. Sayer cut across the radio. "Launch now or stand down. Replacement aircraft remains 26 minutes out. Remaining on the pad might cost Navarro the route to surgery." Launching meant accepting a fault no one could reproduce and a crew carrying more strain than the paperwork admitted. Hale looked at Mara. "If I place you forward and you interfere, I own that decision." "Yes, sir. If I keep you in the cabin, you still have your patient." And Reed still has one fatigued co-pilot and no independent observer. The SEAL team leader looked toward Reed instead of Sayer, waiting to see which authority mattered more, the one on the radio or the one holding the aircraft. Hale faced Mara so the entire cabin could hear him. "She can't fly this. Put her back with the patient." The young SEAL who had joked looked away. Hale was closing access through certification and command responsibility, making the dismissal harder to challenge and more public when Mara obeyed. She returned to Navarro, checked his mask seal, and wrote a new time on the strip inside her green kneeboard sleeve. "We moving?" he asked. "Yes." "You sure?" She looked toward the cockpit. "No." Reed advanced the controls. The Black Hawk lifted and turned toward the mountain corridor. During the first minute, the flight remained smooth. In the second, turbulence moved through the cabin. By the third, the upper ridgeline had disappeared. The co-pilot made a small correction. The delayed, linked response returned. Mara felt it through the litter mount before Reed glanced right. Over the crew channel, his voice dropped low. "If it catches again, tell me before you fight it." The co-pilot answered after a pause. "Understood." The SEAL team leader heard the exchange and looked toward Mara. Reed no longer trusted the aircraft completely, but Hale had ordered the one person who understood both the warning and Navarro's shrinking margin to remain behind him. The corridor tightened around the Black Hawk as cloud bands crossed the windshield in fast gray sheets. Mara adjusted Navarro's oxygen mask and watched his saturation fall from 92 to 90 despite the increased flow. His breathing had grown shallow, and the pulse beneath his collar ran faster than it had on the pad. She lowered the litter angle, checked the dressing at his side, and added a support strap to reduce movement. "How long?" the senior corpsman asked. Mara checked the cabin altimeter and the progression on her timing strip. 9 minutes before another full climb and divert cycle becomes a bad medical choice. She keyed the intercom. "Reed, patient tolerance window is 9 minutes. We need the lower corridor before it closes." The co-pilot answered first. "Main field has surgery. The lower route only reaches the service pad. The service pad keeps him below the altitude, costing us time. Ground transfer can continue from there." Hale turned. "The pad is unfinished. So is the weather. Can Navarro survive the planned route?" "Maybe. That is not a no. It is not a yes." Hale left her on the channel. It was limited, but her judgment had entered the decision space. The aircraft entered rougher air. Mara felt the next correction through the litter rail before the cabin yacht. The co-pilot added another input before the linked controls completed the first response, widening the movement. "Chief, the resistance is back," Mara said. Reed's voice tightened. "I feel it. It is more pronounced through the right seat controls under cold and vibration." He'll look back. "That is an inference." "Yes. The aircraft keeps supporting it." Sayer reported that the main corridor remained open for 18 minutes. Mara looked at the ridge disappearing under cloud. The sky does not know his forecast. The young SEAL who had laughed tightened his harness. Navarro's eyes drifted closed. Mara tapped his cheek. "Eli, look at me." His eyelids lifted. "Still here. Stay here." She looked forward as the co-pilot's hand moved again. Before the nose responded, Mara said, "Do not add another correction." A fraction later, the aircraft answered. The co-pilot looked back. "You saw that. I felt it before the nose moved. You were stacking input against a delayed, linked response. Let the first correction finish." Reed said, "Ease it." The co-pilot relaxed his arm. The next movement settled with less oscillation. Reed looked toward Mara. "She is right." No one laughed this time. The SEAL team leader leaned forward. "What do you need?" Mara pointed toward the rear bulkhead. "Check every restraint. Move the heaviest bags inboard. Nobody changes position without telling me or the crew chief." He repeated her directions, and the team moved immediately. The young SEAL tested the strap on a metal case twice and shifted it away from the cabin edge. Hale watched without interference. Mara had not gained cockpit access, but her judgment now controlled the cabin's preparation. The green kneeboard pressed against her thigh. Once it had carried route cards. Now it carried blood pressure, oxygen saturation, and the moment a patient's body would stop tolerating someone else's plan. Hale asked, "Why did your qualification expire?" "Family care leave. Then a transfer. You could have re-qualified." She looked at Navarro. "I chose flight medicine." She did not tell him about the civilian patient who had died after Mara remained silent while a senior pilot continued through worsening weather. She remembered the safe landing, the orderly report, and the later call saying they had arrived too late. Ahead, a brief opening revealed the lower corridor beneath the main ridge. "That route is disappearing," Mara warned. Reed looked toward Hale. The commander studied the terrain and Navarro's monitor. "Hold present route 3 more minutes. If conditions degrade, we reassess." It was not the diversion Mara wanted, but Hale had placed a limit on his own decision. The control resistance returned with a hard shudder. Above the co-pilot, the checklist case he had reseated trembled inside its loose clip. He reached up, but turbulence struck first. The case tore free and struck him near the temple. His head snapped sideways. The Black Hawk rolled sharply right. Reed arrested part of the movement, but warning tones filled the cockpit as the co-pilot's hand slipped away. "I've lost him," Reed shouted. "The link controls are binding through the right seat." Mara moved before the warning tone ended. The Black Hawk dropped and rolled farther right, throwing one SEAL against his harness and lifting Navarro's litter against its mounts. Reed fought the controls with both hands. "Secure the cabin." Mara steadied the oxygen line, checked the litter locks, and looked forward. The co-pilot's head hung against his shoulder, blood darkening the skin near his temple. "Senior corpsman, take Navarro," she ordered. Airway, oxygen, saturation, and dressing. Call every change. He moved to the litter, but caught her sleeve. You're going forward? You trained on this patient profile? Yes. Can you maintain the airway and recognize decompensation? Yes. Then you have him. Mara was not abandoning Navarro. She was transferring him to the only other clinician capable of sustaining care. The SEAL team leader braced against the frame. What do you need? Keep everyone seated. Secure anything loose. Nobody reaches for equipment if we yaw again. He repeated the order. The young SEAL who had mocked her locked a case beneath the bench. Mara leaned toward the co-pilot, confirmed he was breathing, and checked his pupils. One reacted slowly. He did not track her voice or hold his head upright. He could not safely return to duty. Reed brought the helicopter closer to level, then lost several degrees when the resistance returned. His attention had narrowed. He missed the corpsman's first saturation call and asked Hale to repeat a radio message that had been spoken clearly. Mara recognized task saturation, a competent pilot solving the immediate problem so completely that every other threat disappeared. I can hold it, Reed said. His shoulders suggested he could hold only the next movement. Hale gripped the frame. How long to the main field? Too long if this worsens, Reed said. I need the right seat awake or clear. The lower service pad is still our best option, Mara said. Hale turned. You're not making route decisions. Navarro has less than 8 minutes. Another climb takes most of what remains. The corpsman called, saturation 87 and falling. Hale looked toward the litter. Can you reach the service pad? He asked Reed. Not alone, if the resistance stays in. Then stabilize and return to Raven Spur. Mara shook her head. That requires climbing into the corridor we lost. Sayer's voice entered the radio. Maintain the authorized diversion. Do not transfer controls to non-current personnel. Reed answered through clenched teeth. I have an incapacitated co-pilot and an intermittent control assist anomaly. Return to base. Vance stays out of the cockpit. The aircraft lurched again. Hale reached toward the disabled co-pilot's harness. Can we move him? Not while Reed is carrying the aircraft alone, Mara said. I can take the right seat position without fully removing him. Hale stared at her. Your currency expired 3 years ago. I know. You're not current on this variant. I know. Touch those controls, and your flight status may end before we land. Your medical assignment may go with it. Flight medicine was not Mara's fallback. It was the profession she had built after leaving the cockpit, the work she wanted to teach, and the only place where she had learned to live with the patient she once failed by staying silent. Navarro's monitor alarmed. Mara remembered the official conclusion from that earlier flight. Procedure had survived, the patient had not. She released her medical tether. Then record my decision accurately. Hale stepped into her path. Stay with your patient. The corpsman has him. That is your assigned station. The cockpit has 1 functioning pilot doing the work of 2. Reed said, I am holding it. Another catch moved through the controls. The nose swung, and the helicopter lost altitude before Reed recovered. Holding is not the same as managing, Mara said. The corpsman called 85. Hale's certainty fractured. What can you actually do? Share the control burden. Keep the attitude stable while Reed flies. Give him enough attention to see the weather, hear the cabin, and choose a route. You will not be pilot in command. I'm not asking to be. You follow Reed. Yes. If he orders you off the controls, I release. Hale looked at Reed. Can you use her? I can use anyone who understands what the aircraft is doing before it does it again. Sayer ordered Hale not to authorize the transfer. The service pad route vanished behind cloud. Mara stepped closer. Investigate me after we land. Hale held her eyes. If we land, that is why I am moving. He stepped aside. It was not permission yet, only the removal of his body from her path. Mara loosened the co-pilot's harness, shifted his weight clear, and pulled herself forward as the aircraft pitched. Pain flared through her shoulder. She dropped into the right seat, secured the harness, and placed one hand near the cyclic without touching it. Hale leaned forward, still ready to stop her. Reed stared through the windshield. Either let her help me, he said, or choose who we lose. The Black Hawk dropped again, and Hale made the choice. He pushed the intercom selector toward Mara and spoke across the crew channel. Vance has the right seat. Follow her corrections. Mara closed her hand around the cyclic. Uneven pressure moved through the linked controls, confirming that the problem was more than turbulence. She did not try to take command from Reed. She matched part of his effort and absorbed enough resistance to free his attention. I have support on the right. You retain command. Support confirmed. The helicopter yawed. Mara felt the delayed response building before the nose moved. Hold the correction. Do not add another. Reed waited. The aircraft answered late, then settled instead of swinging farther. Behind them, the SEAL team leader repeated Mara's cabin instructions. Gear moved inboard. The corpsman reported saturation 84. Pulse climbing. Mara checked the timing strip. The original 9-minute window had narrowed to less than 6. We need the lower service pad. Sayer ordered them back toward Raven. Spur Hale looked at the primary corridor. Now a wall of cloud. Reed, primary diversion means more altitude and a longer turn. Can you make it? The aircraft might. Navarro might not. Another control catch tightened through Mara's arm. Pain spread across her shoulder, but she held the shared pressure. The maintenance road follows the lower ridge. The service pad lies east of the cut. Reed found an opening beneath the cloud. I have the road. Hale keyed the crew channel. Crew chief, locate the pad. SEAL element, follow Vance's load calls. Corpsman, report every change. The power shift became visible in every person who moved when Mara spoke. The Black Hawk descended. Cloud opened briefly on a dark slope and narrow road. As the aircraft slowed, the resistance increased. Mara's right arm shook. Can you hold? Reed asked. Long enough. She was buying him attention 1 second at a time. The crew chief searched through cloud and rotor-driven dust. Road confirmed. No pad visual. The corpsman called 82. A climb would widen the approach, but reduce Navarro's remaining tolerance. No climb unless terrain forces it, Mara said. Reed glanced across. That keeps us tight. It keeps him viable. A ridged shoulder appeared. Reed raised the nose to clear it, and Navarro's monitor alarmed. Level as soon as we clear. Reed did. The resistance surged and pulled Mara's arm forward. Pain tore through her shoulder, but she held long enough to stop the aircraft rolling toward the slope. Reed recovered leverage. I have more control. Take more of the load. The cyclic suddenly grew lighter beneath Mara's hand. The release was almost worse than the resistance. The Black Hawk drifted toward rising ground. Mara adjusted as Reed reacted, and their inputs met instead of competing. The aircraft returned toward level. Reed looked across at her. He could have decided that trusting a non-current medic had created another hazard. Call the next change, he said instead. The unfinished service pad appeared below, then vanished inside blowing dust. Pad lost, the crew chief called. The SEAL team leader reported a cargo strap had loosened during the last yaw. Secure it and shift the heaviest bag left, Mara said. Keep everyone on that side until touchdown. The young SEAL dragged the bag across the deck under the team leader's restraint and locked it in place. The cabin balance changed enough for Reed to reduce his correction. That helped. Navarro's alarm sounded continuously. Margin almost gone, the corpsman called. The pad returned as a broken outline, construction material crowding one edge. Pad visual. Usable center. Right side narrow. Sayer ordered them to abort because the pad was uncertified. Hale ignored him. Continue. Dust erased the landing area as Reed began the approach. Mara's shoulder weakened and the cyclic began, slipping against the pressure. Reed saw it. Tell me before you lose it. Taking less load. Transfer it gradually. She gave pressure back to him while keeping enough to catch the delayed response. The pad edge appeared through the dust. 3 feet right, the crew chief called. Forward clear. Left side good. The fault released once more, and the Black Hawk drifted. Mara caught the change before it became another swing. Reed corrected with her and centered the aircraft. The first gear touched hard enough to jolt the cabin. The Black Hawk bounced once. Mara kept the attitude level until Reed brought it down again. This time it remained on the pad. The corpsman opened the cabin door. and the SEALs moved Navarro's litter toward the service shelter. Mara kept her hand on the controls until Reed said, "Stable. I have it." Only then did she release. Her right arm dropped, nearly useless, against her side. Through the open cabin, she saw the corpsman signal that Navarro still had a pulse. There was no celebration, only people completing the rescue. Then Sayer's voice cut across the radio. "Secure the aircraft. Nobody leaves. This is now an unauthorized control incident." Hale looked at the intercom selector beside Mara's hand. The trust he had given her in the air was about to cost both of them on the ground. Mara unfastened her harness with her left hand because her injured shoulder would not lift cleanly. Reed caught her elbow when she tried to stand. "That is not a working arm." It worked long enough. Outside, 2 SEALs carried Navarro toward the service shelter while the corpsman maintained oxygen. Hale remained near the cockpit. "Medical first. Statement afterward." "Statement first. Pain medication changes memory." Reed nodded. Hale gave her 5 minutes before treatment, allowing her to preserve her account before anyone shaped it, but he did not say he would defend it. At the shelter, the corpsman reported Navarro was holding at 88 and still inside the viable treatment window. The young SEAL who had mocked Mara handed her a pen. She wrote the sequence on the reverse of the timing strip. Ground hesitation, taxi catch, altitude changes, co-pilot injury, Reed's overload, Hale's transfer of authority, and the moment she entered the right seat. She also recorded that she had left her assigned station and touched the controls while non-current. "You do not have to help them accuse you," the young SEAL said. "Accuracy is not an accusation." The SEAL team leader approached with his men. "We heard Hale's order. We followed yours. We can state that." A safety officer stopped them. "No coordinati testimoni." Write individual recollections and discuss nothing until interviews. The corpsman quietly sealed his independent casualty notes in a separate evidence envelope. A Raven Spur safety team secured the aircraft, placed the flight data module in a numbered container, and preserved the maintenance history. Major Corbin Sayer arrived soon afterward. His attention went first to the evidence seal, then to Mara's sling. The preliminary issue is unauthorized cockpit interference by non-current medic. "The aircraft was unstable before she entered the seat," Reed said. "Maintenance reports, no total failure. Total failure was not required for us to be in danger." Sayer looked at Reed. "Your qualification is also under review. Consider whether your statement should imply that you surrender control to someone without currency." "I did not surrender command," Reed said. "I accepted support. Words will matter. Then record mine correctly." Sayer turned to Mara. "Vance, I can characterize this as a collective emergency response under degraded conditions. That is not what happened. It protects the crew. Shared confusion is survivable. A non-current medic taking controls against direction is not. There was no confusion after Hale transferred authority. Your own statement admits you were out of position. Yes. That may remove you from flight medicine permanently. Yes. Revise it, and the review can focus on weather and the injured co-pilot." Mara looked toward the Black Hawk. "The review should focus on the full sequence." Sayer lowered his voice. "You're already missing the instructor deadline. Do not lose the rest of your career over wording. The wording is the difference between what happened and what protects you." She handed her unchanged statement to the safety officer. Hale stood close enough to hear, but did not contradict Sayer. His silence opened the first real doubt that his trust had ended at touchdown. By the time they returned to Raven Spur, Mara had been suspended from flight duties. Reed was removed from operational flying pending review. The co-pilot remained hospitalized and could not provide a reliable statement. The instructor selection office notified Mara that her application could not remain active during an aviation investigation. The deadline would pass in 48 hours. Hale read the notice beside her. "I cannot order them to hold a cycle. I did not ask you to. Mara, you asked me to follow the process. I am." The next morning, preliminary inspection found the control assist system within broad operating tolerance. Sayer circulated a draft stating that the aircraft remained controllable until an unqualified crew member entered the cockpit, and that excessive combined input preceded the hard landing. He described Hale's command as an improvised cabin instruction rather than a temporary transfer of right seat authority. The SEAL witnesses were ordered not to discuss the event. Reed faced possible loss of qualification if he admitted he could not manage the aircraft alone. Mara's shoulder was immobilized, her flight access revoked, and the instructor's cycle closed before the formal review began. One final message from Sayer's office offered to replace her statement with a collective response version. She deleted it. For several hours, it appeared the system would preserve its readiness record by dividing responsibility until no one could identify the decision that created the danger or the action that ended it. Then Reed entered the safety office and requested that flight data, cockpit audio, weather records, and medical timing be synchronized to the same clock. "You're measuring whether the controls failed," he said. "You have not measured when the aircraft stopped falling." The formal review convened in Hangar 3 with the dust-streaked Black Hawk beneath the lights. Mara stood near the aircraft with her arm in a brace. The SEALs who had heard Hale order her back to the patient sat beside the aircrew. Sayer opened with the preliminary finding. The aircraft did not experience total control failure. The lead safety officer looked toward the synchronized display. "That is not the only question. We must determine whether one pilot could safely manage the combined control anomaly, weather, injured co-pilot, medical emergency, and diversion requirements." Sayer argued that each condition remained within an established tolerance. "Combined condition," the officer repeated, "not isolated condition." Flight data, cockpit audio, weather records, and maintenance history appeared on one timeline. The first control delay occurred during the ground check. Another appeared during taxi. A third developed under cold vibration in the corridor. All began before Mara entered the cockpit. Reed stood when recognized and pointed to the attitude deviations after the co-pilot became incapacitated. "I could arrest each movement. I could not manage the resistance, weather, route, injured co-pilot, and cabin at the same time." He advanced the display to the moment Mara engaged the controls. The deviations narrowed. "That is when Vance took the right seat. That is when I got the aircraft back." The young SEAL who had mocked her looked from the graph to her injured shoulder. The team leader was called next. "What changed in the cabin?" the panel asked. Before Hale's order, we treated Vance as the medic and waited for the cockpit. After the order, she coordinated load movement, patient reports, and timing. We followed her because the commander told us to, then kept following because her calls worked. "Did you understand who retained pilot command?" "Yes." Reed had command. Vance held the right seat support function. His testimony ended Sayer's claim of confusion. The SEALs had not merely watched Mara. They had carried out the rescue under her coordination. The senior corpsman produced his casualty timeline. It matched the entries in Mara's green kneeboard sleeve. He confirmed Navarro's saturation had fallen during the climb, reached 82 on approach, and improved after the lower diversion. Weather records showed the primary corridor closed earlier than forecast. Maintenance history revealed a recurring ambiguous control assist indication that technicians have been unable to reproduce consistently. Sayer argued he relied on a technically valid release. The panel asked whether he disclosed the recurring indication, the substitute co-pilot's fatigue, and the replacement aircraft delay when pressing Hale to launch. His answer returned to readiness schedules and operational uncertainty. Mara understood part of his defense. He had not sabotaged the aircraft. He had selected the interpretation that protected the exercise and treated every warning as resistance. When questioned, Mara did not minimize her conduct. "I left my assigned station. I was not current on the aircraft. I touched the controls without normal authority." Sayer leaned forward. "Then you admit the violation." "I admit the action. The panel must decide whether it was necessary. You could have remained with the casualty. I transferred him to a qualified corpsman. You could have accepted the authorized diversion. The medical timeline shows what the additional climb would have cost." Sayer offered a revised statement describing shared crew confusion. Mara left it untouched. "That wording erases the difference between the release decision and the emergency response it made necessary. You are protecting your reputation. The instructor cycle is already gone. She placed her original statement beside his. I am protecting the sequence. Hale stepped away from the wall. The sequence includes my decision. I initially denied Vance cockpit access. During the emergency, I transferred temporary operational authority to her right seat function and ordered the crew to follow her corrections. Sayer objected that Hale could not retroactively qualify her. I'm not qualifying her retroactively, Hale said. I am accepting command responsibility for using available competence after the normal crew structure failed. The lead officer looked directly at him. Do you accept that statement as part of your permanent command record? Yes. Even if the decision is judged improper? Yes. Would you make it again? Hale looked toward Mara. Earlier, the answer completed the reversal. The commander who had said she could not fly the aircraft now placed his authority and record behind the decision to let her take the right seat. The panel cleared Mara of reckless interference. Her suspension would remain until medical recovery and formal requalification, but no punitive finding would be entered. Reed was cleared of improper transfer. Sayer was removed from aircraft release authority pending administrative review for improper risk acceptance, incomplete reporting, and retaliatory attribution. The instructor selection cycle remained closed. Mara would not regain it. As the room emptied, the young SEAL approached with the radio he had carried during the flight. He placed it in Mara's left hand. Next time, we listen before the aircraft makes us. The team leader waited behind him for Mara's response rather than Hale's. Hale then approached with a supervised re-qualification request. His signature occupied the command sponsor line. This does not restore the missed cycle. No, it creates a lawful next step. Mara looked at the pilot block, then at the flight medic patch on her chest. Am I being returned to a cockpit, she asked, or trained to serve both seats? 3 months later, frost edged Raven Spur's upper pad beneath a clear mountain sky. A Black Hawk waited with its cabin open and rotor still. Mara crossed the concrete carrying her worn green kneeboard sleeve. Her shoulder had healed enough for supervised duty, though cold air still tightened the joint. The instructor position she had wanted belonged to someone else. No panel had reopened the cycle, and Hale had not tried to disguise that loss with promises. Mara had spent the intervening months completing rehabilitation, simulator evaluation, aircraft familiarization, and the first phase of a dual-role requalification track. She remained a flight medic. The single patch sat above her pocket, and trauma shears still rested against her harness. Inside the kneeboard sleeve, however, an officially issued right seat checklist now rested beside her casualty cards. Reed occupied the left seat. Near the cabin, the same SEAL element prepared for an integrated evacuation exercise. The young SEAL who had once joked about simulator courage approached Mara with a radio. Route medical assessment before loading? She accepted it. Patient profile? Simulated chest injury. Poor altitude tolerance. Then the primary field is not automatically the best field. He called the team closer. They listened while Mara explained how the patient's limits would affect the route. No one looked toward Hale for permission to take her seriously. They had sought her judgment before the aircraft launched. That was recognition she trusted. The Raven Spur response to the incident had become routine rather than ceremonial. Recurring intermittent control indications now required second-level release review. Medical input became mandatory when weather diversion changed casualty tolerance. Sayer remained in service, but no longer controlled release decisions or readiness evaluations. The administrative review concluded that he had accepted avoidable uncertainty and tried to transfer responsibility onto Mara's expired qualification. The consequence was substantial without becoming spectacle. Hale approached with 2 clipboards. Medical load first, he said. Months earlier, he would have addressed Reed and expected Mara to remain in the cabin. Now he looked directly at her. Recommendation? Mara reviewed the simulated casualty and forecast. Lower corridor outbound. The service pad remains the first medical diversion. No unnecessary climb after extraction. Hale asked Reed for objections. Reed had none. The SEAL team leader said, "We follow Vance's medical route calls." Hale approved the plan, turning trust from an emergency exception into ordinary mission preparation. He handed Mara the second clipboard. It contained the next supervised right seat evaluation, signed again on the command sponsor line. "The cockpit is yours for the training block," he said. "Under Reed's command." "Understood." "And the cabin?" "Still mine when the patient needs me." That is why the program exists. Mara had not received the instructor appointment she lost, but Spur had contracted her to help develop integrated flight medicine scenarios while she completed requalification. The path was slower and less secure than the one she had planned. It did not erase the cost. It gave the cost purpose. A training litter arrived. Mara entered the cabin first, inspected the oxygen mount and restraints, then placed one hand on the empty frame. 2 taps, once for the patient, once for the route home. The senior corpsman smiled. Still doing that. Still bringing people back. She secured the medical kit and moved forward. No one blocked the cockpit entrance. Hale stood outside where he had once raised a hand to stop her. This time he passed the right seat checklist through the open door. Mara settled into the seat and fastened the harness. The green kneeboard rested against her thigh, holding a casualty timing card and supervised flight checklist together. It no longer belonged only to the pilot she had been, or the medic she had become. It held both. Reed looked across. Right seat. Mara rested her hand near the controls. Her shoulder tightened, but she did not mistake pain for weakness or endurance for invulnerability. Ready for supervised support, Hale stepped away from the cockpit. Everyone who had been on the earlier flight understood the motion. The commander who had once defined Mara by the seat he denied her now trusted her enough to leave the doorway clear. The engine began to rise. Mara tapped the kneeboard twice, closed the cockpit door, and watched Hale move away as the rotors started turning.